My prayer for the ACNA and Tech is that we would do a little bit less of this and a little bit more of this. My name is Colin, and this is Nicaea 3. I want to welcome everybody back to the channel for today. My name is Colin. This is Nicaea 3. So for those who have followed my channel for a while, you will note that I actually full-time attend both a conservative Episcopal church in the mornings on Sundays. I also attend a midweek service at an Episcopal church. And then in the evening, I attend full-time an ACNA church. And I have reasons for doing this. You can reference some of my other videos. I'll probably touch on it a bit in this video. But I definitely have reasons as to why I do this. So I say this, everything I'm going to say in this video, as one who truly does have a foot in both worlds. And that's not to just stand on the fence. It's because I think that there are deeper eschatological realities going on here. However, what I want to address today is a lot of, and this is not intended to be directed at anybody in particular, I see a lot of fairly intense rancor, back and forth fighting. I see a lot of straw manning of the other side, a lot of not necessarily perceiving the best in the other occurring very often in various circles of both the Episcopal Church and the ACNA. So I see this on both sides of the fence. And what I want to do is address this a little bit in this video. Now, I see this on Twitter and other places. For those who follow the news of the ACNA, you'll note that the bishop of the diocesan bishop of the ACNA diocese in South Carolina just recently attended the consecration of a new Episcopal site alongside the female bishop of the Episcopal Church of South Carolina. Okay, I believe it was the consecration of a chapel or school. Now, for those who know my stance, because I feel like, and this is true when you do theology on YouTube, just in general, you always have to qualify everything and qualify your stance. I do believe in male-only holy orders. I'm definitely a conservative. I don't think that these are just issues that can be slid to the side, that they're not important. What oftentimes happens, we see this happen in political circles, this also happens in theological circles, is people get pigeonholed. And then when you pigeonhole somebody, it's easy to just discount them. So if somebody gets pigeonholed as an Anglo-Catholic, the rest of the Anglican world can just be like, that guy's just an Anglo-Catholic or whatever. We can kind of push him off to the side and ignore him. Or if somebody is labeled, for example, as a liberal, you can just kind of push them aside. However, this happens on an even deeper level. People can go, that guy's in line with the Reconquista movement, so we can just push him over here, or this about this guy, or, the Anglo-Catholics do this too. They'll go, that guy's just an evangelical. We'll just push him. And we very oftentimes, that's a way to live in a safe zone, is you pigeonhole the other side, and then you kind of secure boundaries around your own position. Now, what I want to do in this video is, again, talk about how some of these things can be very detrimental, not only to the eschatological unity of God and the eschatological will of God for the church, it also emboldens those who are on the other side of the fence from us to strengthen their own resolve and to push harder against us. And what this leads is, at first, it leads to deeper and deeper division. Now, I do want to say, I do believe that oftentimes, not always, but people sometimes on both sides of an issue can be attempting to act in good faith. So I'm not trying to question anybody's character or say anything hurtful or negative about an individual. I'm simply saying that people can bolster their own, they can really believe that they're doing the right thing and yet be completely in my opinion, completely missing the mark from where they should be. They can be in left field when the game's being played in center field, or they can be right field when the game's being played in center field. Okay, so I want to address a few things. One other thing I didn't say. I do believe in male-only holy orders. So that's another thing. Again, I could get instantly pigeonholed there, or this conversation can turn into that. I do believe in male-only holy orders very strongly. Okay, so know that. I believe in traditional views on sexuality and gender and marriage. Just in general. Okay. Now with that said, a couple things I want to address. I'll address a couple overarching principles that we need to theologically understand when addressing these issues. And then secondly, I want to speak from both the Episcopal Church side and the ACNA side with my hope of drawing both sides closer to what I would say is really the will of God. And then from there, we can talk about where do we go in the eschaton and what are some what are some ways that we can think through this as we continue to work through things. And when I address either side, I'm going to poke holes at both sides and say, the ACNA might say this, but do you realize the problems that exist here? And then I'll look at the Episcopal Church and say, and you can see the problems here, but do you understand the problems on your side? And mutual understanding should draw people closer together. So I guess from there, I'll kind of conclude this with some biblical witness of really the whole New Testament is about the unity of the church. Just like full stop. People oftentimes don't understand this. The New Testament is about, obviously it's about God setting us right in Christ and launching the new creation, and the death and resurrection of Christ launch a new creation of which we are forgiven of sins and then drawn into the light of the gospel. Of course, I include that in that. But what I'm saying is it has a pragmatic telos for us of the unity of the church. So we are set right so that we can be right setters for God's world. That's really the core principles of the New Testament. Okay? We're set right so we can be right setters for God's new world. Okay, so to some of the overlying principles I'll start with, okay? For one, when we talk about are we in communion with this group or are we in communion with that group? And I see this again, I'll point out where the fault lies on both sides. What the entire methodology and epistemological framework of Anglicanism believes that there is only one sacrifice of the Mass. There's only one Holy Eucharist. There's not two, there's not 500, there's not a Roman Eucharist and an Eastern Eucharist and a Episcopal Church Eucharist and an ACNA Eucharist. There's only one. There's not different Eucharists between different dioceses. There's only one Eucharist, okay? And the way that this theology works is because God is one, there's one mysterion, okay? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. There's one mysterion. And then in that, the oneness of the Eucharistic sacrifice is represented for us on each and every altar. So the one sacrifice of Christ on the cross is united also with the future eschatological reality of the marriage supper of the Lamb. Both of those are the same thing. And then they are present on each and every altar that has ever been celebrated. So a couple examples. In the year 320, if you were to go to Carthage in North Africa, that Eucharist being celebrated in the Anglican paradigm is the same Eucharist being celebrated by the Carolingian divines in Worcestershire in the UK, is the same Eucharist that's being offered 5 years ago at an ACNA parish in the Diocese of South Carolina, is the same Eucharist being offered in 1920 in the Episcopal Church, is the same Eucharist being offered in 50 years from now, if the Lord hasn't returned by then, in the Eastern Orthodox Church in Greece. The Anglican paradigm is that there is one Mass and one Eucharist. So the way that we view this, for those who really understand how branch theory works and how this is tied in with the mysterion, is that technically speaking, we are already in communion with everyone who has a valid Eucharist. Okay? So we are already in communion from our perception. The Anglican perception is that we are already in an ontological form of communion, yes, through our baptisms, which Rome also affirms, and then also through the one Mass, the one Eucharist, right? The one sacrifice of Christ, which is represented across space and time on each and every altar where the Holy Eucharist is celebrated. Okay, that we are already in communion, because to be in communion means that you share the one Eucharist with one another. And we need to recognize that. So again, in the Anglican paradigm, this is how we can hold something like branch theory, because there is only one Eucharist. And so baptism and the Eucharist ontologically unite us beyond all the chaos and the mess. If you want like an on-the-ground kind of easy analogy to compare this with, marriage is a sacramental reality that unites two people in a bond that's not broken by fights and disagreements and even really serious things. And for those who hold a traditional view of marriage, that bond is indissoluble if it's two baptized people who intended to be married and intended it to be a sacramental reality. Okay, so So if you believe in the indissolubility of marriage, this is very similar to the indissolubility of the Eucharist. Okay, it's when I say it's similar, it's a reflection of. It's obviously not an analogical connection, or it's not an anagogical connection. It's not a one-to-one. It's an analogical connection. It's an analogous one. So, anyways, I hope that points the point. Now, secondly, from the Episcopal Church side, I realize that there are differences between the Episcopal Church and the Church of England. Okay. However, the two really are in lockstep in so many ways. And in a sense, all the groups within the official, all those who really hold on to and cherish their communion with the See of Canterbury. The See of Canterbury officially recognized the holy orders of the ACNA. So whether you like the ACNA, whether you think it should be a jurisdiction or not, I'm speaking to my Episcopal Church friends here. The Eucharist offered there and the holy orders in the ACNA are officially recognized by the Anglican Communion, full stop, from 2017 on. Okay? Now, with that said, in the ACNA, there's absolutely, I struggle to see, and I realize, again, women's holy order throws a major, major wrench into it. And you can reference like a video I did with my friend Joe from the Young Anglican YouTube channel on this very question. Again, I hold scholastic views when it comes to male-only holy orders, so I would hold that too. But that doesn't negate the fact that there are many, 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 many priests within the Episcopal Church who maintain valid apostolic succession. Okay. And so if that is the case, then the mass they're offering is still a valid mass, which would mean that it participates in the one. So I say that to my ACNA friends. Male priests in the Episcopal Church who were properly ordained by a male bishop with proper male lines cannot just be, their mass can't just be discounted. Okay. And so if it is truly valid, then the Catholic Church is fully present, because Catholicism, yes, it means of the whole. It also means that every part of the Catholic Church, every parish where there's a valid priest and valid Eucharist being offered, that the whole can subsist in that part. So both can exist at the same time, right? So that needs to be noted. Now, I realize in this engagement with Chip Edgar, he's engaging with a lady bishop who obviously, again, we don't need, I mean this respectfully, but people don't need to say, oh, she's not. I would not call her an ontological bishop. I'm just using the term out of respect for her. Okay. But we still recognize a genuine baptism in her, right? As long as it's proper form, matter, intention, and minister. And so, for one, all Christians are due respect. But two, we are meant to have an orientation towards unity, even with those whom we don't agree. And even if it's with groups that we can say, you know what, I don't necessarily think this group has valid holy orders, I can still find real communion with them. So these are very similar things that could have happened. Now, I realize the male-female distinction, if we want to talk about valid holy orders, that can be a fair distinction. But for example, if we were to go back to just after the time of the English Reformation, the infighting between those loyal to the specifically Latin part of the Catholic Church, right, to the Roman Rite, and Anglicans in England who believe they're a part of the Catholic faith, also believe they have some level of autonomy within their jurisdiction. Now, autonomy doesn't mean completely on their own, but if you understand Anglican ecclesiology properly, I think you know what I'm saying. But we see ourselves as a part of the larger Catholic Church, yet we still have to walk with our own vindication, with our own episcopal line, in ways that we believe are faithful to Christ and to the teachings of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church across time. So if we were to look at this time period, there would absolutely have been unimaginable rancor. And I know there was killing, right, across various lines. So would not have been received super friendly. But today, look at where the ACNA holds their convocation. They hold it at a Roman Catholic parish, right? At a monastic church, basically. This is par for the course. So what I am saying is that we have to come to a point where even when everything has not been worked out jurisdictionally, there can still be real bonds of charity and love and growth. Now, Chip Edgar also is somebody who does believe, to my knowledge, I believe that in that diocese, they do ordain female clerics. So whether I agree with that or not, that is not in and of itself for him going against what he believes is a valid Eucharist. Would it be best if the Episcopal Church was completely conservative on matters of gender, sexuality, on holy orders, and on creedal realities completely? Absolutely. I'd say the creedal realities are really even the highest one there, which in my contention, I would say most Episcopalians, even liberal ones, are quite creedally. I'd say the inclusive orthodoxy camp, even though I don't fully agree with it, is much more prominent in the Episcopal Church than liberals who reject creedal realities. So I think that's actually that the ones who reject creedal realities are in a minority, whereas the inclusive orthodoxy camp is in the majority, in my humble opinion. In the ACNA, would it be great if all of the people within it all had the view of holy orders that I believe is sound, which is male only holy orders? If they all held a higher view of sacramentology, if they all had like a unanimous view on churchmanship, like absolutely, I think that'd be a great thing. But the reality is there are massive errors in both ways, and there's massive errors in Christendom in all sorts of ways. Okay. But does this then mean that we can't find real places where we can really start trying to bridge the gap and find any points of commonality, any intersections of commonality, and find genuine peace and fraternity with our brothers and sisters in the Lord? And I would just say absolutely, unequivocally, without question, we should. And I could think of so many people. I think I can use their names here. I can think of so many people who I respect who do just this. Okay. For one, I'll note somebody who is very well known in the Methodist world, somebody I profoundly respect, Ryan Danker. If anybody knows that name, he runs the John Wesley Institute. I don't need to go into everything about him, but I'll just say he's a very, very orthodox and sound Anglican. He's actually in the Episcopal Church. He's in a conservative Episcopal Church, to my knowledge. But very orthodox, very pro, Catholic realities and principles. And yet all the time, and I talk to him personally, yet at the same time, so often I see him, he's constantly engaging in the Methodist world. He constantly engages with people who are, probably have very different views on holy orders than him and things like this. I see him engage in these circles all the time. It's a model for, I can still find real, I can find real kinship in the Christian faith via our baptisms and via our shared orientation towards making Christ and his church known. Then from there, I don't want to speak for Ryan here, I'm speaking for myself, but I would say in line with what you find in like Unitatis Redintegratio and what you find in the Best of the Plene essay movement within Anglicanism, we can still acknowledge that real ministry can exist in a place, even if we would not label it strictly as valid. So I would never go to a church for my Sunday Mass obligation where it was like, I didn't think that it was a completely valid Mass. So I want to put my cards on the table here. So if I travel, I make sure that the priest here is properly ordained, and obviously it's a man, and I think they have valid holy orders. And like, I'm very careful about that stuff. So with that said, though, it doesn't mean that ipso facto then that I think that anything done by, let's say, a female cleric or even, and I know, again, I'm being a little tough, a little more straightforward in this video. It's because I think it's important and needed. Even a more liberal person in the Episcopal Church, who I would profoundly disagree with about a whole litany of things, do I then think that that means that their Eucharist, that nothing happens? I do believe that there's still real ministry that can be done through their parish, through that Eucharist, and through God's action in the sacramental life of the church. So I want to be really careful how I say this because I still want to honor my leadership, and I'm just a humble lay member in the ACNA and in the Episcopal Church. With that said, I would say that I think it's important, as one who does believe that the Plene essay view is really important to Anglicanism, I would encourage Anglicans of various flavors and stripes to recognize that even when somebody disagrees with us, and even if they disagree with us very profoundly, that real ministry still occurs there. Now, obviously, this is true when we believe they have a valid Eucharist. So let's say somebody of a different churchmanship than us, but we at least can affirm their holy orders. And then to a lesser degree, because it's not then within the visible church, we would say, but we would still say that it can participate in the church and in the mysterion in a way that's mysterious to us. We can still say that real ministry occurs in other settings, whether that's, again, people with only presbyteral succession, whether that's in groups that don't even have that, whether that's in a group where there are female clerics or where female ordination has kind of ruptured what we perceive to be apostolic lineage, these kinds of things. We can still say that real ministry is occurring there that can honor and glorify God. And so finding any points of convergence and commonality, I really believe that to be a point of convergence. And when we treat other people with those different viewpoints with respect, what we find is that their hearts soften towards the arguments that we make. So when I look online, and like this thing with Bishop Edgar and the Bishop of South Carolina and the Episcopal Church came together, for my Episcopal friends who rail against that, the ACNA then just becomes more, they dig in their heels further and go, this is why we needed a new jurisdiction. This is nonsense. We're setting in our heels. We don't want anything to do with this group. But then on the ACNA side, when there's this like deep disregard of the Episcopal Church as just like that heretical group, those apostates, this church that totally left the faith. As one who spends a lot of time in the Episcopal Church, there are so many faithful, not only lay Episcopalians, but clergy Episcopalians who are clergy. And this is where I would differ from some of my ACNA friends. I think there are very faithful bishops in there as well. Even though I may disagree with them about certain things, there are faithful bishops in the ACNA, in the Episcopal Church yet as well. And so when we discount all of this, and even discount the ministry to some degree of our brethren who disagree with us about whether it's sexuality and these kind of things, all that's going to do is make the other side, the Episcopal Church side, go, see, look at those people who are I'm going to use strong language here, but they may say like those people are bigoted. Those people are they break the jurisdiction of the church. They don't, and so they go into different camps and they rail against one another. And what this does is, in my perception, is it further divides. Whereas I believe the whole point of the gospel is bringing convergence together, right? It's like people, boy, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, guys. That's all right. I'll just lay it out on the table. Jesus Christ is the only way, the truth, and the life. Full stop. Okay? There's no salvation found anywhere outside of Christ and then his mystical body. When I say that, though, that does not mean that people who are not visibly in that body, that they could not possibly be saved by an act of God. Of course they could be. And this is what something like Unitatis Redintegratio from Vatican II is pushing. People deeply misunderstand this. But so when there's friendliness between like Pope Leo XIV, another man who I'm profoundly respect, one of my favorite people on the planet, when he engages with like Muslims or something, the cordialness and the respect he shows to them is actually going to soften their hearts towards the Christian claim. If we are just forever battling, people get much more rigid. Do you want another example? You also see this in Israel with Jewish people. The more Christians, there is still animosity in some sectors of the Jewish community, literally going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to the Crusades. And I have very nuanced views on the Crusades. I think, they're very complex. So I'm not here just totally discounting them. I think there were good things about them as well, although that's complicated. But anyways, lest I digress, my point is Jewish sentiments go way back there. They certainly go to the time of the way they were treated in the 20th century in Europe. And so their views of Christianity, they don't even really give the New Testament a fair shake. Lots of times it's just an instant animosity and bias that they grow up with. Well, we don't want to perpetuate that, right? We want to build bridges and hopefully eventually soften their hearts to the fact where their eyes can see and they go, wow, this Messiah of ours is wonderful and good and beautiful, and it totally aligns with the Tanakh, right? Like, this is what we want. But my point is that when we soften the way we approach the other side, they're much more likely to listen. When we engage in rancor, they're not going to listen. They're going to go further into their camp. This is the same thing. The same thing politically. I don't need to get into that. That one's obvious. But the more this side just goes down the line, the more this side goes down the line, and boundaries are drawn and fights are had, and it just perpetuates this. And I'm not saying that we need to always find reason with people who hold a really erroneous view. I'm not saying we always need to just say, "Oh, that's fine, and let's soft pedal it forever." That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that those certainly who bear the name of Christ have a valid baptism, and to some degree, at least they believe that they're trying to follow the faith, right? If they believe that they're trying to follow the faith, we should give them some benefit of the doubt there and engage with them in charity and love and peace, not just instantly go, those guys are heretics, we're not talking to them. And what's wild is I actually think that it's to some degree worse when it's within the same tradition. So I actually think that the Episcopal Church and the ACNA, the infighting there is much more rampant than it is between like Anglicanism and Roman Catholicism today, for example. This is true in a lot of circles. You see this in other traditions too. Eastern Orthodoxy, I mean, look at what goes on between the different patriarchates in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. There's, in some sense, more fighting there than there is between them and Rome. Like, right, like the Patriarch of Constantinople, in a sense, is much closer to the pontiff, to Pope Leo XIV, than to Patriarch Kirill, right? In a sense, Kirill. So again, this is not to like call anybody out. It's just what you see coming out here. If you want a really Anglican way of thinking about this, see it is C.S. Lewis's image that he gives, where he says countries don't, Christian traditions don't touch like countries do. So countries, for example, touch at their borders. So the United States touches Canada here. Okay. Now, if they touched like countries do, what that would mean is, let's say Canada's Roman Catholicism and the United States is Anglicanism. That would be like the most conservative Anglicans touch the most liberal Roman Catholics. Okay. That's not how spiritual geography works, is what C.S. Lewis said. He says, rather than working like this, he says how it really works is like this. He says they touch at their centers. So the more somebody is authentically an Anglican, the more they're actually closer to an authentic Roman Catholic than they are to a super trad or a super liberal Anglican. And a centrist, a real Roman Catholic who touches the heart of Roman Catholic theology is actually closer to a center Anglican than they are to a super trad or a super liberal Roman Catholic. Okay. This is also true within Anglicanism. A real coherent Episcopalian is way closer to a real coherent person in the Anglican Church in North America than they are to a really conservative or a really liberal Episcopalian, or than an ACNA person is. They're much closer to a central Episcopalian than they are to a really conservative or a really liberal ACNA parishioner or clergyman. So anyways, that's probably enough. But my point is that you can see this analogy of C.S. Lewis taking shape in these conversations. Now, just a quick biblical point I'd like to reflect on comes from Romans, the book of Romans. Okay, so I talk about this a lot. If you've heard me say this, I find these things edifying to say again, because if you just say them once, if people watch every video that you make, then it can get repetitious. But if they don't watch every video, it's like, I never know who's going to hear what. And obviously the message hasn't like changed the world from my end. You know, I think the message has changed the world coming from the gospel and from the scriptures. And so it's always in this perpetual state of reforming and bringing Christendom and the inauguration of new creation closer towards its consummation. Okay, so obviously the scriptures are doing that work. I'm saying me beating this drum hasn't necessarily reached every voice I want it to reach yet. But so if you look at the book of Romans, basically it does what N.T. Wright says, that we know that we're set right so that we can be right setters for God's world. That's Romans. I feel like you could exegete Romans that simply, in a sense, as complex as it is. Chapters 1-8 are about how we're set right. 1-5, all people are in need of forgiveness of sins. 6, 7, and 8 is the new Exodus. Baptism, wilderness wandering is chapter 7. Why do I do the thing I don't want to do? Chapter 8 is new creation, the crossing into the land. So 1-8 is about we are set right through the new Exodus, through delivery from slavery to sin. And then 9-16 is, okay, I did all that. So now you can go out and actually build a new humanity that actually reflects who God wills for us to be. And the church itself is the microcosm of that is meant to flower out until its light, goodness, and beauty floods the entirety of the cosmos. That's the gospel right there in a sense. We're set right through the death and resurrection of Christ and the pouring out of the Spirit. And then through the pouring out of the Spirit, we go so that we can be right setters for God's world. Not now, where this becomes pertinent, 9 to 11 is about how the Jews and the Gentiles both need to be humbled so that no man can boast. This is absolutely meant to be a blueprint for the rest of Christendom. It's not like the ACNA. I love the ACNA. The ACNA is way too low church overall, has way too low of a sacramentology, and in some sense, lots of circles in the Episcopal Church, I think, are way closer to the heart of historic Anglican Eucharistic practice. Not across the board, but just there's a lot of sound Eucharistic practice in the Episcopal Church. I know people are going to struggle with that. Obviously, I struggle with the Holy Orders question, but I'm saying the way that the Holy Sacrament is treated and the way that it's understood. There's a lot of low churchness in GAFCON and the ACNA, and none of that is. I love GAFCON and the ACNA. I'm within them. At the same time, the ACNA has a much better view of Holy Orders than the Episcopal Church does. They have a much better view of the accounts of creation and how God creates matching yet not exactly synonymous parts in male and female, right? He creates the light and the dark, he creates the fish in the sea, the dry land and the water, male and female, and then they are meant to be a reflection where they're these contrasting parts are meant to be an icon in a sense of the Holy Trinity, certainly about the family unit. You've got father, mother, they come together, forth comes a child. Okay, that whole reality is an icon of the Holy Trinity that's built into the fabric of creation. That's why something like homosexuality is not just a minor thing. It's actually, it gets at the very heart of creation. The ACNA is way, way closer to understanding that than the Episcopal Church, in my loving opinion. On top of this, the ACNA, I think, again, a coherent view of holy orders is very important. A coherent view of gender theory and these kind of things is very important. So, and of creedal of saying the creedal realities have to be, like, if somebody denies a creedal reality, there has to be discipline. There has to be. I'm not saying there's never discipline in the Episcopal Church. I'm just saying that there has to be discipline. Okay, so they're closer there. In some sense, I think the Episcopal Church has a much better understanding of jurisdiction. And this is Joe's argument. Obviously, Redeemed Zoomer makes these arguments a lot. It's different how he makes them a little bit from Joe's, but my point is there's still a jurisdictional reality that the ACNA needs to learn from. Do you see Romans 9 to 11 going on here? This side's right about this. This side's right about this. We can hash out forever which one's more important. I have views too. You can reference my other work there. My point is both sides, in a sense, really need to learn from the other. In the future, I really think is God healing what is wrong in both and drawing them both towards an eschatological wholeness. This is, I think, what he's doing in large scale. I think he does this with East and West after the Great Schism. I think he does this between the reformational churches and the Roman Catholic Church. I think he does this within Anglicanism between the high church and low church groups. I think this happens in so many different ways. We need the gifts of the other, but we can do that without compromising and say, oh, therefore we can just be pluralistic and everything's fine. It doesn't matter what you believe. Nobody thinks that. I shouldn't say some people do. I don't think that. But what I want to contend for is that even if one group is like 80% right and the other one's 20, or even if it's 95-5, or if it's 60-40, whatever percentage difference, the other side is something we can learn from and draw from, and we can still recognize the work that was worked, the ex opere operato realities of their baptisms, of God, what God has done in their sacraments. If they're valid, we can say that full stop. And if they're not something we can call valid, we can still say that God has still can work a good work through their Eucharist. And just if you spend time in those circles, to me, it just becomes apparent to the senses that there are good things going on in different ways. So, and then lastly, so you got 9 to 11 in Romans. 12 to 16 then is about the pragmatic unity of the church in Rome. So it's saying you need to be set right. We're all sinners in need of forgiveness. We're all people who are now children of God. We were sinners saved by grace, right? We're set right by the new Exodus. 9 to 11, all men need to be humbled before God so no man can boast. And then 12 to 16, now this is what this microcosm should look like in the Church of Rome, but then also every place where the church subsists. It should look like this is a microcosm so that you can go and teach the whole world how to be of the whole, to have real shalom in the one Lord. That's the vocation of the church. And so again, this has been a little ranty, but I hope this helps. This is my prayer, friends, for the Episcopal Church, for the ACNA. I know if you want, I think a couple good places to look. Again, I don't agree with everything they would say. I would hold some nuanced views that are different from both like my friend Sean Luke and from Redeem Zoomer, who I know have had some, but my point is, who have had some back and forth on these things. But my point is, overall, I think Sean Luke, my friend, has really tried to engage in good faith from an Anglican ACNA side. I think my friend Joe from the Young Anglican YouTube channel has tried to engage in good faith from the side of the Episcopal Church. And so those would be a couple voices that I think are really seeking to act in deeply good faith. Of course, there's so many others, and even those who speak about the other side in a way that I would disagree with. I'm not saying they're not good faith actors. Again, I believe oftentimes people, even when they're not doing what I just talked about in this video, I still think they can potentially be acting in good faith because they believe they're doing the right thing. My point is to try and say, I'm trying to listen to you, brother, to care about your concerns. I could say this to people on both sides of the fence here, to say, I want you to know I love you. I find camaraderie with you in our common baptisms. I believe that there's one mysterion of which we both participate, or certainly at least somehow mysteriously participate together. Let's try to work at things in the best way we can, where we really listen to the other, where we eliminate some of the rancor and the going back and forth, and let's move forward. I want to encourage that type of engagement. But for those who stand in a way where they're like, we got to draw a firm line here, I still think a lot of those people are acting, probably most of those people, to my opinion, are seeking to act in good faith, and they think they're doing the right thing. The question is all of us just need to be taught by the scriptures and by the core of the faith. What does it really look like to hold principles and yet engage with others? How do we need to be humbled in order that we can, have real understanding? And what is God? I think the ultimate question is, what is God trying to do in an eschatological sense? Where is he drawing us? Where's the divine logos at work? And how can we learn here? So again, I know none of this solves all these answers, but really this video is meant to talk about my prayer for a methodology or a hermeneutic of unity that I believe can be efficacious for us in the modern Anglican world. If you like this content, do consider subscribing, as that can really help keep this channel growing. If you're already subscribed, liking can really help push this content forward. If you feel so moved, I do have a YouTube membership page you can support me at as well. But all that aside, the most important thing you can do is pray and be an advocate and worker for unity, that Christ's kingdom may come on earth as it is in heaven. God's peace, y'all. Have a blessed one. We'll talk to you guys in the next one.